welcome everyone to the Disability Filibuster. This is broadcast number 8, if you can believe it, in our 2022 series. We are still going strong. As the saying goes, we are not dead yet. Not all of us, not yet. We are still here. We are still struggling. We are still showing up and looking out for each other. And we're still attempting to speak truth to power. My name is Catherine Fuzzy. I'm going to be mostly in the background today because we have an amazing and very thoughtful group of people. I know you're going to want to hear from them. And so I'm going to hand it over to them momentarily. I just want to point out that today we are tackling a very difficult subject, a subject that has been too often swept under the carpet in the conversations about MAiD. And that is what goes on inside the walls of institutions. We know that institutions like prisons are very dangerous places. And in the era of ever expanding and ever normalizing MAiD practice, we are going to talk today about what is happening and who are the casualties. This is a filibuster space. It's a crypt space. It is intended to be a safe space. So for all of you who are in the audience joining us today, please be aware we are going to be talking about tough subjects: incarceration, institutionalization, abandonment, death, and suicide. So please take care of yourself. That's our primary focus. That's our main job these days. Keep yourself safe. And if you need support, get that support. This broadcast will be archived. If you're not in a safe space today, you can come back to it when you are safe or when you have someone with you that you can trust. And the same goes for all of us here today. It's important to talk about these tough issues, but we have to do so in a way that respects everyone's boundaries and capacities. So with that word of caution and with a really warm welcome to everyone who has stepped forward to join us today, I'm going to hand this over to your co-hosts, Sarah, Jama, and Ween Hai. Welcome, friends.
Hello. So I guess I'll start with my intro. Sarah and I will introduce ourselves and then we'll pass it to Jackie, I think. But I'm Rain. I go by he, him pronouns. And yeah, most of my work is around police-free schools in Montreal, but I've worked closely with DJ No over the years. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. It's my second time on the filibuster, and it is very cool to share this space with y'all always. So yeah, excited to be co-hosting today. I should do a description, right? Yes, yeah, okay. So I'm a brown trans mass person. I got short hair that was recently buzzed, but it's growing out. I have an eyebrow piercing, I have a septum piercing, and I'm wearing a yellow tank top. Behind me is 2 fridges and some cabinets because I'm in my kitchen. And there you go. I'll pass it to Sarah.
Hi everyone, I'm with the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, based in Hamilton, Ontario, because Hamilton has the largest density of disabled people in the province of Ontario. My pronouns are she and her. I'm at the, Hamilton is on the Anishinaabe territory, Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe territory, which is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And visual description, I am Black. and I am tired. I have a Sailor Moon t-shirt on, a strange cardigan that's like cow print. My hair, I don't know what I'm doing with it, but it's black, and it has like two puff balls situation going on. My background is blurred because my apartment is messy. I'll hand it back to Rain.
Yeah, I'm also in Hamilton, which is, as Sarah said, Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe land. And yeah, with that, we'll pass it to Jackie, because I think that they're doing a land acknowledgement. Take it away.
Lovely, thank y'all. So I will do a little introduction for myself after or whenever it's appropriate. Y'all hosts can keep me in the loop, but I'll just prioritize the land acknowledgement right now. And I am just going to preface this by saying that the land acknowledgements are a tricky thing for a lot of Indigenous folks, myself included, and it wouldn't feel right for me not to do one, but I also want to acknowledge in advance of my land acknowledgements that that they are imperfect practices, and that it's kind of left some of us, not everyone, but some people, it's kind of the only thing that they do as it relates to decolonization and things like that. So we'll dig into that a little bit more as I go, and I did write it down. I'm actually using an older thing I've written that's kind of tweaked for this, but just so if some of y'all will see, I'm kind of looking down my phone, but that's so I'll jump into it right now. So I would like to acknowledge the land that I'm currently on. I know there's people from all over, but I'm right now in what is known as Ottawa, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. In making this land acknowledgement, I want to really remind us all of our responsibilities that come with a land acknowledgement, in acknowledging where we are, where we're gathering, even in this virtual space. I really do urge all of you to commit to amplifying the voices of Algonquin folks, the voices of whomever's lands that you're currently on, and to really practice being in solidarity with those peoples. And with that too, I hope I can kind of very delicately and respectfully ask everyone to take an opportunity, maybe when this is all done, to really reflect on how colonialism may have benefited you and how you can begin to deconstruct that. So to give you a little bit about myself, I am a descendant of the Sachi-Dene people of Fort Good Hope First Nation. I don't currently have status. I'm in the process of doing that. I'm recognized as MAiD, despite being First Nations, just mixed race, colonial government. So I am before you as a proud, queer, and neurodivergent woman. I feel really honored and very privileged to be here with y'all today. What an absolute honor to be asked to participate in this. But I do remain deeply saddened that this is the kind of thing that we even have to do. I wish we didn't all have to use up our emotional labor, our capacity and things like that to address issues like this. Not to say that it's not worthy, it absolutely is, otherwise we wouldn't all be here. But sometimes I think a lot of us are just like, oh, can we just have a little break? Can we have a moment? And, you know, I think everybody here, all the other panelists and our hosts and even those in attendance who may not speak, are going to do a really good job of exploring some of these nuances that we're going to get into and lived experiences, not just of Indigenous peoples, but I do want to specifically acknowledge disabled Indigenous folks across Turtle Island. Disability has long been used. Also, I think my kitty's coming in here, so I apologize if you see. Disability has long been used as a justification for the ongoing colonialism and oppression of Indigenous peoples. Carl. the violence faced by our peoples has been tremendous. However, in saying that, I also really want to take an opportunity to highlight Indigenous resilience in the face of this state oppression, as we continue to fight back against the state and to ensure that our voices are heard. Speaking of my own experience, both my disability and my indigeneity have been considered points of shame by the colonial forces around me, either directly or kind of implied. And as I began my journey of reconnecting with my heritage, I also really began to celebrate who I am and the way my brain works and things like that, and realizing that colonial oppression really did translate into the way I felt about being neurodivergent, and the shame I carried with it. So with that, I also want to take some time, and I don't mean to suggest that everything about disabilities needs to be celebrated, but I do think there is some real beauty in what's conventionally viewed as a disability or as being neurodivergent, at least for myself and for many like me who are very creative, very open-minded, things like that. And the reason I raise that is because so much of the time when we have these conversations, we enter into them in a place of, it's somewhat damage centered. We're focusing on the bad, we're focusing on the harm, and for good reason. There's a lot of that happening. But I think we can also, while doing that, hold a lot of space to celebrate beauty and creativity and things like that. So yeah, in saying all of this, I encourage everybody to really challenge any kind of binary thinking on these topics. It doesn't have to be either or, it can be yes and, you know what I mean? It can be both and. So with that, I think I can close for now. Thank you so much for giving me this space. And I know that was a little bit long-winded, but hey, that's what we do sometimes. So thank you all very much.
No, thank you so much. It's really appreciated. That was a very like good prompt for meditation, I think, for people. So thank you. All right, well, I think the next thing is to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. I don't know who wants to start, but I think we're asking for your name, your pronouns, a visual description, and then anything else you would want people to know about you. And then this is a cool prompt. What are the institutions that you're working against? So with that, maybe I'll just pass it to someone so that we don't have to do the awkward thing of someone being like, so I'm gonna say Q. You wanna go for it?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Q. Had a scary moment there where I was like, oh no, I didn't unmute myself, but I did. I am a queer agender person. I am white and I'm wearing a white tank top, so all of me is just reflecting the sunlight right now. I do want to note that my tank top, although you can't see it, it does say harm reduction saves lives, which I think ties very nicely into talking about carceral institutions. I use they and it pronouns. I am located on the land of the Chiquayak and Palalt tribes of the Stalo Nation, so-called Chilliwack, in the Fraser Valley. A little bit of personal background. I work as like a grassroots community death doula. I have pretty close access to people who are experiencing the end of life as someone who is also going through that long process. And so that is like some of my biggest, most important personal work. And institutions that I'm working against are very much incarceration is quite close to home for me for a number of reasons. But with that, I'm also always thinking about how institutionalization ties into kind of more traditional thoughts of incarceration, like prisons and detention centers. I guess I didn't do like a super great visual description, but there's not much to describe. I have, my background is really just a blank wall. And as I said, I am a white queer, very tattooed, using supplemental oxygen and wearing huge glasses that take up half of my face. That's me.
Cool. Thank you, Q. I forgot to add this, so maybe I will just ask you to tack this on. And for the rest of the panelists, if you could please also do a land acknowledgement. Q, I don't know if you want to do that real quick.
Yeah, I did say I am on the Puyallup and Sequoiac tribes of the Stalo Nation, but always good to reiterate, it's no problem.
It's totally my bad. I just know I didn't mention it. Okay, so with that, I'll pass it to Jess.
Hi everyone, my name is Jess Sash. My pronouns are they, them. I'm so excited to be here in conversation with everyone. I care about this topic a lot. So, visual description, I'm a white kind of androgynous person with long brownish crew-colored hair. And I'm sitting in my kind of living room slash kitchen with some art on the wall behind me, some of which is mine, some of which belongs to other people. I've been calling this wall the glue wall because I've been kind of curating it with a disability theme. So the text wall in the middle belongs to me, and it says, I'm sick of this glue, but it's good to know I can sit here. And land acknowledgement in Tikaranto, Treaty 13 territory, which is the land of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Mississauga of the New Credit. Jackie, I really appreciated the invitation to contextualize our relationship to colonial benefit differently. And I think a lot of it's the overlap when doing land acknowledgements or land conversations, because they can be really complex with how to situate that differently. So I'll say a little bit about how I like to do that personally without taking too much of everyone else's time. And I feel like this will come up again and again in a conversation about institutions in a carceral state. But I like talking about what a land acknowledgement and what Treaty 13 even is. And the Toronto Purchase happened in 1807. And a lot of the work of everyone on this panel very much is connected to how things like land and resource are often acquired through theft and coercion in ways that egregiously don't acknowledge how the value of those things when exchanged for money. Even the class action suit that settled, I believe, in the early aughts around trying to reimburse folks for Treaty 13, it still is ineffectual in its inability to acknowledge that money is such an abstract resource compared to land and water and trade routes that continually provide abundance. And I think that that's super connected to what a lot of us think about and talk about, connected to carceral institutions. And I appreciate the invitation to kind of contextualize that over that, because I don't know if institutions themselves, when leading discussions or events, often set the stage for that to be an actual conversation, rather just a performance of like almost like an opening ceremony. So I appreciate that greatly. And then personally, I connect to this topic through both working as an artist in the visual arts and as well as in dance. Mostly located in Toronto. I do a lot of work in a community basis, which is really intentional, connected to a disability justice ethos. But I also do work outside of communities that I have called home relationships too. And then in addition to that, Ontario, for folks that are not based here, is going through a provincial election right now, and the topic of ODSP, for folks who don't know, which stands for the Ontario Disability Support Program, has for the first time that I can recall since being on ODSP since 2009 has been even used at all. I was kind of surprised that the NDP even knew what ODSP was. And so I've been an advocate probably since, I would say, since my teenage years, having worked like this job in palliative care in a summer respite facility for adults and children with disabilities. So thinking through that aspect of care work alongside artwork and art institutions where a lot of those bodies move or are erased from moving. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jess. All right. Aisha, do you want to introduce yourself? Okay, go for it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am speaking to you today from the unceded and the unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. And yeah, like folks said earlier, I hope that we do that not as empty words of acknowledgement, but as continually trying to be in solidarity with First Nation Métis or Inuit, First Nation Métis people or Inuit. And yeah, so like, I don't know, like, we have to remember that we live in a settler colony under a regime that perpetuates like genocide. And that in itself is something that should not be acceptable to anybody like walking on this land, you know? It should be like a general subject that is gonna be taken over everyday life, that people are doing everything in a daily basis in order to deconstruct these realities that is affecting people in these genocidal ways that are so normalized through this war that is waged on people. So, and African descent people and like migrants and like disabled folks through different ways, you know, but it all comes back to apartheid regimes that are treating people differently, you know, than others, and just killing off people and killing off the land, you know. So like, it is what it is, but this is the reality of it. So grateful to be here, existing and walking amongst folks. So my name is Aisha Bensilmane. I go by the pronouns they, them. And right here, in terms of a visual description, I am like, have like kind of like curly hair, but it's like in a ponytail right now. So there's like fizzies like around it. And like, I'm in the light from the window, so it's hitting my face, and you can see that I'm wearing a white t-shirt and I'm sitting on a white wicker chair. And behind me, it's the light is a little bit lower, but you can see a plant to my left, and a snake plant, a big snake plant to my left, and a bike beside it that is blue. And then there's a desk with some stuff on it, and a banker's lamp, and like a poster that says "Abolish all cops." And I didn't put it there on purpose for this thing, but I had a thing earlier and I put it there on purpose. So, but that's what it is. That's what's behind me. And that's kind of like beige, the room. It's like a renter's beige. It's very just normal, like still the same color that I moved in. So yeah, and I organize here around prison and policing and deportations, and organized through the hotline, although that for me came to a stop a little bit, just kind of come back to that. Well, actually, like already kind of back because I got arrested on the 1st of December on New Year's Eve. So for merely like being like in solidarity with folks, so it is what it is. But I'm glad to be here, and thank you.
Really good to have you.
Is it cool if I combine the first two?
Questions.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna combine the first two questions, just given the time. So the first question would be.
Wait. There's two more people. There's two more people.
There's more panelists. Oh, this is huge. Okay.
There's two more people. We're like, at least we know. Now you panelists know that we're combining the first two questions. So, okay. So, let's keep it rolling. I guess Megan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey, I'm Megan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling from occupied Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory in what's known as Ottawa. I am a white femme with red lipstick, a red shirt, and brown hair. Behind me, there's a poster with a red rose and some pages from the children's book We Move Together. You should read it. and anything. Oh, and yeah, I'm the creator and host of the Invisible Institutions podcast. I am a survivor of institutionalization and find myself in hospital settings a lot. So I'm happy to be here and happy to be in conversation with everyone. And I would say that the institutions that I work against are all part of the psychiatric, industrial, and disability industrial complex. And, you know, burn them all down. And I'm excited to start. I think we have just Jackie's gonna give a little intro. Oh, and Amit.
And Amit, yeah. So I feel like I'll pass it to Amit and then Jackie, and then we will actually get started with the questions. So Amit, take it away.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm just so honored to be a part of this panel and to learn from everyone. I'm just so thrilled. It's hard to actually express it, actually. But yeah, I'm calling in from so-called Toronto, which is the traditional territories of, or it's the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I can just be very brief about myself, actually. So I work as a palliative care physician, and I work in hospitals, I work in home care, and I also work in long-term care institutions, and I've worked in retirement home institutions as well. I've worked in some of the worst impacted long-term care institutions through COVID-19, some of the institutions that were reported in the media or where the military was in as well. And right now I provide specialist palliative care services in many settings, but also in long-term care institutions as well, where I sort of continue to work. And yes, I also dream of a future and, share a vision where institutionalization itself will just not be necessary and will not be part of living with a disability or growing older in Canada.
Thanks, Amit. And last but certainly not least, Jackie, go for it.
Thanks, y'all. I'll try to keep it brief, given I've already had some time. But I am Jaclyn or Jackie, either is fine. I use she, they pronouns. I'm pretty much okay with anything as long as you're using it in like a decolonizing way. The institutions that I work against are anything that oppresses anyone who is queer, anyone who is racialized, or honestly anyone that is at all concerned with just hurting people or people or even anything like that. But my primary focus for a long time has been Indigenous folks in corrections and things like that, really opposing corrections, really trying to return to communities, to return to self-governance, things like that. I am femme presenting. I have some artwork behind me. It is my brother's favorite, Frida. He loves their self-portraits, and so it's an interpretation of that. I am tattooed like crazy, and something about me I suppose I would like y'all to know would be that in addition to this, to the work I've talked about already, I'm also a full spectrum Indigenous doula. So if you need some doulaing and you're near me, please feel free to reach out. I don't charge for my services as long as I have the capacity. The last thing I'll say is that anyone on this panel whose phone number I have texted to tell them how beautiful they are. So for those of you who are not, whose phone number I don't have, you're also very beautiful, and I am so honored to be in this space with you. So just know that's the positionality that I'm coming to this with. And I'm all done now. Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot to give my description. Can I just give my description for a minute? Sorry about that. Yeah, so I guess I'll try to describe myself. I'm a brown, middle-aged person. I'm wearing glasses, and I'm wearing this light blue checkered shirt, and I'm in an office environment, sitting at a desk, and to my right, there's a desk and a filing cabinet behind it, and to my left, there's also a table with a chair visible. Thank you.
Okay, so as you may have heard, my plan is to combine the first two questions because I'm going rogue. So the first question would be, can you explain what some of the realities of life in institutions are? And the second one is, what are the ways people are targeted by the state for institutionalization or criminalization? Anyone can go.
I think Amit should start.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I could try to speak about that. So, yeah, I mean, as someone who works in long-term care facilities on a regular basis, I can really just say that, you know, the whole system is designed in an extremely flawed way at this point in time, and we're seeing more and more of that through COVID-19, where our long-term care institutions were disproportionately impacted through the pandemic, and had some of the worst death rates, in fact, in the amongst all OECD countries. But I can tell you that the neglect is actually still systemic, and I have not really seen, even through all the death and suffering that has happened through COVID-19, any significant improvements, or in fact any improvements at all in terms of care levels, in terms of staffing. And the fundamental problem with our system here in this country is that we have crushing austerity measures when it comes to what we call community care services, which means care outside of hospitals, as well as not clinic care, but long-term care and home care as a package. And as part of the problem, we refer to long-term care in our country as an institution and a place that you're sent away, and not as a type of care that you can receive where you are. So that is a fundamental problem, where long-term care should actually be a verb, and it should not be a place or an institution where you're sent away. Just to give you a brief overview of where we stand compared to other OECD countries, and this is sort of work that I do on health policy, when we compare in general to other countries like Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, the Nordic countries, and of course, these are all capitalist countries with aging populations who need support for people with disabilities. They spend, and I'm averaging this, I'm not giving you the breakdown for each country, but I'm averaging, that they spend around 3% of their GDP on sort of this basket of services, home care and long-term care. At least 50% goes to home care. And in countries which are thought of as the gold standard, such as Denmark, 2/3 actually goes towards home care. And they have actually a legislated ban for the last decade on building any new long-term care institutions. And their long-term care institutions, honestly, are more like supportive housing, where they have intergenerational mixing, they have smaller numbers of people under one roof, and they do not have the large scale 200 or 300 bed sort of warehouse style facilities that we have here in Canada. So that's one issue, and that's what's happening in other places. But here in Canada, I said that number of 3% of our national GDP, which goes toward this section, or sorry, 3% in other countries, but in Canada, it's 1.3% as per a recent report. So obviously it's less than half. So there's no way we can aim to achieve proper care and proper supports for the people that require it. And secondly, out of the 1.3%, only 0.2% is actually going towards home care. And disproportionately, we are spending on institutionalization, which is fundamentally ableist. It's absolutely wrong. And it's actually not in line with the wishes of people who are actually going to end up in these institutions. When we look at people with disabilities and when we look at older adults, nobody wants to end up in an institution, regardless of the level of care that is provided, regardless of whether it is sort of a government-run institution or a for-profit institution. People don't want to go there in the first place. They don't want to be separated away from, their families and their communities and away from society. And I'll add to you that, even when we look at sort of spending government money and taxpayer dollars, it is far more expensive to actually build long-term care institutions, to find land, to put up these huge buildings, and to provide care, in these institutions, rather than providing care for people in their communities at home. So it would actually be better, and we would be able to fund care for a lot more people. It's a very important conversation because, we're speaking about people with disabilities, and we know as you get older, the chance of living with a disability is a lot higher. And our population is aging very, very quickly, where in 2021, that was the year that baby boomers, our largest age demographic, turned 75. So we know more and more people are going to need these services. Now, what is the reason that this change is not happening? We would kind of think that especially after COVID-19, there would be changes. And I can tell you a little bit of the statistics around that, where your chance of dying from COVID-19 as an older adult, at least, this is the information I have, if you lived at home, was about 73 times less as compared to if you lived in a long-term care institution or in a retirement home. So it's dramatically, you're much safer, actually, even from an infection control perspective, living at home. So what is the reason this is not happening? Honestly, I don't have a specific answer, but I can say that the people who are benefiting from continuing this policy of institutionalization, building more institutionalization, are developers, and also for-profit long-term care corporations who are, of course, taking away from public money and diverting this money towards shareholders, to paying CEO bonuses. And we could have a system here in Canada where we nationalize home care. We have national standards for home care, and we allow people to live with a disability, to live with dignity and to live with respect, and to be provided the care and social supports that they need and deserve. And basically, I'll just wrap up by just saying it doesn't have to be this way. And I really hope, I know it was mentioned earlier that, of course, we're at the tail end of an election campaign here in Ontario, the largest province in Canada, and many people are talking about long-term care, but I'm seeing very little conversation around home care. I'm seeing some conversation around ODSP, and that's very important. But I think we have to look at that, and that's very crucial. But we have to look at housing, because when we talk about home care, I mean, the word, actually inequity is in the word home care, because we should be thinking about providing everyone housing as a human right. Supportive, supportive housing, accessible housing should be something that we should really think of when we're talking about care for people. And I think of that as healthcare as well. Housing is healthcare. And we should also be thinking about medications. We should be thinking about equipment. We should be thinking about also improving working conditions for health workers and social workers. These are all things that we can think of. And these are all things that Canada, our country, has the resources to do and implement right now.
Thanks so much for answering. I'm going to throw it to Aisha only because it would be a really great segue from talking about long-term care to our present systems.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions, and also to my co-panelists, Amit, for those very alarming remarks that he gave, and thank you for the work that you do. I just want to say that institutionalization and criminalization are, highly linked, and we know that the prison criminalized people for their disabilities, for example. Folks, when we are when there was like a deinstitutionalization of mental wards and hospitals, mental wards. What happened with that? After that, there's a proliferation of various other types of institutions. Whether it be like I'm not a researcher, and like Megan can correct me if I'm like wrong. But proliferation of different types of institutionalization. They became insidious, like long-term care homes and stuff like that in the community. They become privatized and stuff like that. And people also, the other people who did not end up in those homes, they also got criminalized and end up in prison, and this is what it is, because when you look around you in prison, even the most hardened, tough, like quote unquote, like criminals, they look around and they say like, yo, all these folks should be out, even the people who like engage in the most like gruesome things, and they're in prison. They say to us like, a lot of folks in prison should be out. So these folks are not even abolitionists. I believe that everyone should be out of prison. And they observe that there is an increase of folks who are living with disabilities who are incarcerated. You know what I mean? These things, they are statistics, but we know them from lived experience, that this is what it is. That's how the state deals with disability. When I walk in the neighborhood around me, when I do time inside in jail, who comes to jail? You know what I mean? Is our disabled kin and disabled kin who are getting targeted by the police in different areas, either at encampments or shelters or around areas where there is poor people, and they push them through the revolving door of the prison, and that's what happens. You get out, there is literally no support for you. You go back in prison, the jail destroys your life. I was just talking to my friend earlier today, and he told me that jail, he's a disabled comrade who was like fighting very like hard inside, against all the violence that he faced at the hand of the prison system. Like, for example, not bringing him to appointments that he needs to for his healthcare stuff, the guards not willing to push his wheelchair in jail just to bring him to another area. So they put on the paper that he refuses to go to get showers and stuff. But literally, they're the one who refused to push him just because they don't want to push a wheelchair. The ableism is so entrenched in carceral settings. These people don't even know about like what's ableism, because if they know, they're gonna think that they're horrible people, because they do the most horrible things. So yeah, so after this comrade, like some people, they when they get out of jail, after they systemically injure them, literally like the doctors, and I'll come back to that. I think there's another more appropriate question for that. The doctors in jails are like literally like committing violence against sick people, disabled people on a regular basis. They're murdering them. The doctors in prisons are murdering people, or making their disabilities worse. So when you get further like traumatized inside and injured, you come out into the community, and sometimes they try to force you in long-term care homes. Even if you can live by yourself, they try through like workers and through like counselors to force folks who are coming out of jail into long-term care homes, and this is like very alarming, you know what I mean? To learn that this is what they're trying to do, instead of supporting folks with like things that they can do, jobs, incomes that they can receive that can allow them to live like dignified lives. Instead of doing that, they want to like push them into another institution that will further injure them and potentially kill them as well. Just coming back to the question, and like also like I just want to like talk about how like the immigration system is an ableist system too, how it like keeps people away from the settler colony, from so-called Canada. If you are disabled, you can't apply, because through certain like streams of immigration, you cannot apply because of your disability, because you have to undergo a healthcare test before you get approved for immigration. So there's a lot of folks who are either displaced or need to go somewhere where they are affected by the immigration system and they are kept out of so-called Canada. Well, they're humans and have the right to move through the land. But I wanted to just highlight how the prison system during COVID was even worse for folks who were incarcerated and who were disabled. There was literally like no services provided. Like people can't access like personal service workers, can't have like compression socks in time, you know, they can't go to appointments, even more. So imagine before the pandemic, it was even worse for people inside. And after that, like folks were literally getting killed by the state. And that's what happens because in prison, it creates death. And a lot of folks take their lives, you know, take their lives when things get too much and when they can't, you know, just like live, you know, when, I don't know, they just, folks take their life a lot of times, you know, in prisons. And there is no natural death behind bars. Any death behind bars is not a natural death. So like no one is gonna come tell us that our kin who are dying in jail for various reasons because of the structural neglect from the healthcare systems, because everything is linked. Like those austerity measures, they affect people who are also incarcerated, you know what I mean? Like more so, there's like in the community, there's no continuity of care between community and in prison, you know, like folks who come in with medication, that stuff like gets suspended or gets suspended, like the doctor just like suspends your medication that you have been taking for a long time, you know what I mean? So yeah, like they are death, like jails are death traps for our kin, and they're being killed in there, and we can't just stay on the sideline and do nothing. But unfortunately, like we're not able to do much because this continues to happen and on a regular basis, and it must stop because we cannot treat each other based on ableist ways, because it's not gonna work for all of us. Look what is happening to our kin. Everyone, like they are getting killed by the doctor at the jail, by the whole healthcare system, and like there's nothing happening. The other institutions that are supposed to be there for oversight, they are not doing their job, because if they were doing their jobs, we don't have to be here today. Other than the College of Nurses of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, the College of Nurses of Ontario, all these colleges are not doing nothing because the people who are working under them, people present complaints day in and day out about them. And those complaints never go nowhere, you know, because, you know, you're pitched against these like huge like laws, you know, you have to defend yourself against like legislation and like precedents, you know, and even the appeals of those decisions, they don't go nowhere. They always side with the doctors. How can you always side with the doctors when all these people are dying, you know? So these, even those institutions that are supposed to be there for oversight, they're just there to like as like lip service, you know, as like window dressing, you know. That's about it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Aisha. That was super helpful to help us understand the connections to our carceral prison systems. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, Jess, go for it.
I just took a shit ton of notes. Thank you both for what you just shared, Aisha and Amit. I'd like to like jump in a little bit of what both of you just shared, as the other Torontonian in the room as well. And I actually feel, I really appreciate that you brought up housing as like a care right, but I actually think it's a lot more inextricably linked with ODSP connected to a lot of what both of you just shared and a lot of my notes that I just took while you both spoke. Part of why I'm really passionate about the topic of institutional incarceration and all the forms that it can end up taking is self-determination. And I think from the stories you both shared is, what often comes up again and again, in addition to the just extreme amounts of violence that are necessary and costly, is the way in which, this institutional warehousing, whether it's in a long-term care facility, sorry, I'll try to speak slower, or in a prison system, often robs, humans from the ability to see each other as community. And I think that often comes in the form of one of the questions that was asked by the moderators was, why are certain folks targeted? And I often think about the visual legibility, and that takes a lot of forms, race, class, whether you're speaking or not speaking, whether you're auditory user, and a lot of things that are packaged as healthcare plans or as economic plans end up being something that robs you of an experience in your lifetime of knowing what it feels like to have community with people like you in a self-determined way. And so while I vehemently agree that housing is a huge issue with this coming election, I've also seen some of the leaders talk about accessible housing in a way that I think ignores that there's still really entrenched gatekeepers to, okay, so say we have our minimum percentage decided of, accessible housing available. The people administering and doling out that housing are largely still able-bodied folks who are not necessarily trained or thoughtful or mindful in how things are doled out. And I think ODSP or income support, which only exists because of segregational histories that decide certain bodies are unfit for work, it kind of impairs an ability to kind of make decisions on your own and make housing decisions on your own, make lifestyle decisions on your own. And I feel like the resonance between those two things. And I think housing provides a stability that it would be so great that folks in certain embodiments could have, and thinking about the histories in Canada of I know this is something that Megan, you brought up, I think in one of your recent posts or podcasts, Canadian histories of labor workshops for folks with disabilities around not a lot of folks realize that folks living in segregated group homes often are provided work that is in such a low wage that kind of reifies and it kind of fortifies a lot of this producing a culture of not being able to have all your needs met, but beyond that a kind of distrust of anyone that you share an experience with, which I think is both culturally and spiritually super harmful and connected very much to a lot of what you brought up, Aisha, around the really deeply damaging, cultural violence of colonization in Canada. And it's super visible in what you shared around how these things are managed in prison systems. But I guess I'll leave it with, I'm curious to hear other panelists' comments around I feel like largely Canada doesn't know about its own histories that are ongoing and present around segregation and how that looks institutionally in terms of connected to land theft and land coercion and where we place reserves and where we place institutions, and how a lot of what I've had to combat with art institutions, which are linked a lot when you try to push harder than just having your art on the wall about disability and doing it in a window dressing way. One challenge I find is the ableism present based on visual legibility, communicated legibly, and how the impact in an ongoing way of segregation has had on people, just their body choreography, doesn't even know how to talk to some, doesn't even know how to talk to disabled people, because disabled bodies have been so segregated from public view and from public engagement, and from having a place and having a value. And it's a struggle a lot, because as much as I can try to articulate things again and again in a packaged way, when negotiating with institutions around these ideas, often people just unconsciously fall back into a body memory and a body choreography where they just don't have any folks, who are in bodies that have endured these histories in their lives, and they don't know what to do. And the only thing that folks rely on operatively is a kind of charity model or micromanagement. And I'll leave it there, because I feel like everyone has thoughtful things to say on that, but it permeates everything. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. We're gonna pass it off to whoever else wants to go. Q maybe, or Jaclyn, or Megan.
I could just really.
Oh, I was just gonna say maybe people should answer quickly so we can get through the rest of the questions too. That's all.
If I could just very quickly add one thing, it would just be to, as we are thinking about these questions, and as we get into our ones that we're going to discuss later on, a lot of the things that are coming up are like, how are we going to fund these initiatives? Where are these resources coming from, and things like that. And I just find it really important to call particular attention to the fact that the wealth of this quote unquote nation, the wealth of Canada, is a direct result of the exploitation of Indigenous folks and Indigenous non-human beings, such as, everything, all the other living and non-traditionally living things that in the land and the water, in addition to also, other people of color, other oppressed communities and things like that. We would not have the wealth that we have as a nation, especially as such a young nation. We wouldn't have that if it weren't for the exploitation of so many people. So when I hear these conversations and we talk about where our resources should be going, I want all of us to remember that these are our goddamn resources. They are not, and I apologize for saying it that way, but it's like, they're ours. They belong to us. Any wealth that exists in this land is a direct result of people like us that are attending this and that are participating in this and our communities. And we need to remind them that. We need to be loud about that, because it is owed to us. And it's not their generosity, it's not a policy decision or anything like that. It is owed. So that's all I have to say about that for now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would like to add to these really robust conversations is we've created a system such that people are explicitly targeted by the state for criminalization and institutionalization. That's what our country was founded upon. And it is an ongoing practice, and a practice that really people are set up to be put within. So whether that's through our education system, which streams people through special education, and then pushes them off to the side and fails to reimburse them to move into other career paths or college programs, or the ways in which group homes are disproportionately funded within our developmental services regimes. So recognizing that congregate settings are inherently prioritized in our funding models and within our services. And then the realities of life in institutions, I think, are really important to recognize. And I was really grateful to hear from Amit and Aisha on the really important connections between those places. So recognizing that there has been, just this morning, there has been a slew of deaths within correctional sites. There is an ongoing use of, I think I just am like really stuck on Aisha's words that there's no natural death behind bars. And I think like we can't not see that and connect it with the 20,000 people killed during COVID or in long-term care and disability institutions. And we can't disconnect it from the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who have gone missing within institutions, who continue to be missing from institutions and group homes and long-term care facilities, who have never been looked for, who or whose deaths have been accepted, regardless of if they are through practices of restraint, whether it's through suicides or COVID. Like these are all violences that are enacted daily within institutions, and there are like people are explicitly targeted for this institutionalization. They're set up to be living their entire lives behind some form of bureaucracy or some form of detention. And so, yeah, I think recognizing the realities of life in institutions, which is of restraint, of a lack of control, of a lack of community, of a lack of like humanity, and also like a lack of access to not humanity, to nature and to the non-human entities. And so like seeing those side by side, I think is really important to contextualize what is going on and what the risks of MAiD are within these settings. Yeah. Sorry, the last thing I wanted to add was I was really struck hearing about lots of the losses and talking about whose death is accepted within institutions. And so specifically recognizing that for many, many, many people, oh no, I lost my train of thought. Nope, it's gone. Maybe it'll come back, but we'll see.
Q had to step out for crip reasons, so won't be staying for the rest of the panel. So yeah, so I think that will mean we're moving on to the next question.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for that also.
All right, so just this morning, there was an inquiry into the suicides of 3 prisoners at the Central East Corrections Center, and across the country, we know that the death toll for institutionalized disabled people from COVID has surpassed 20,000, as we've heard from our panelists and just as we've heard over the course of the pandemic. And so I guess this question is, in what ways do institutions engage in death making? And you guys have kind of spoken to this, but I guess we're just fleshing this question out a bit more. And so anyone would like to start? Megan?
Yeah, I remembered my train of thought, and I think I stopped it because it was about this question. So maybe I'll start. So death making is a really important concept, which talks about how institutions and how like normal everyday practices result in violence and ending the lives of people. And so institutions, through both of those examples, but through so many different examples we know are made to end the lives of people. So whether that's through the architecture of the buildings, which are designed to contain, designed to maximize the number of people and minimize the number of freedoms. And then the ways in which, of course, those structures force polluted air that picks up COVID-19, that picks up all the various forms of infections that are so dominant in institutions like TB and like many other airborne diseases before, but like institutions have always been structured to result in death. They have always had higher than average death rates. They have always had forms of confinement like solitary confinement that completely isolate people and that frequently result in death. And so, I mean, I think institutions, be it from their construction or from their ongoing practices, really are focused on ending lives and really are focused on doing it as fast as possible. So we see this through the life expectancy of long-term care residents, which is 18 months. And we see this also through people who are forced to sit through those innumerable losses if they're incarcerated in institutions for a long time. So if you're there for 30 years, you're seeing your entire floor die, your entire institution die. And then there's also, of course, like the regular everyday aspects of what like scholars Jen Rinaldi and Kate Rossiter talk about as institutional violence, and the ways that that is carried out through deprivation of food, taking people's medications, forbidding people from talking to their family members or care providers or supported decision makers, or the ways in which institutions coerce people into having filing DNRs, or into, as we know was documented across group homes through the pandemic, there was this slate of people who were forced to sign DNRs knowing that their lives were at risk as a result of these very structures. And so, I mean, institutions really are just set up to kill, and that's what we have to remember as their primary function. It's not to keep us safe, it's to kill people.
I feel like I want to pass it to Amit, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. I kind of felt like I should follow what Megan said. So thank you. Thanks so much. And yeah, that really, I do agree, Megan, with what you're saying. As somebody who works directly in long-term care institutions where, you know, I mean, we've talked a lot, and I'm just going to speak about what we've heard generally in the media. We're talking about staffing levels and working conditions, and they're so atrocious even now that, you know, regular care, which we would think that would just be the basics of survival, is often you know, happening very late, or sometimes not even happening at all. So I can share an experience where, you know, perhaps a few months ago, I was talking to a personal support worker, a PSW in a long-term care facility, who had started working at 6 in the morning and was still there at around 8 p.m. at night, and was planning to stay longer because she was worried that if she left early, there would be several residents who wouldn't get a shower for, you know, really the next, you know, few weeks, right? So that's actually how bad things are in some long-term care institutions. And although, once again, there's been conversations through the pandemic about increasing the staffing levels, making sure people are you know, they get proper food, they have time to drink water, they get their medications on time, it takes away from the human aspect of actually living. Because living is much more than just bathing and, you know, feeding someone and giving them medications. There's very little focus beyond sort of what I just spoke about, the, you know, the basic care necessities, and, you know, other things are thought of as sort of extras where they're barely happening. Things like physiotherapy, where we keep somebody mobile. And as we can imagine, if we are providing somebody physiotherapy, these would actually be life-prolonging services that would dramatically improve their quality of life. Occupational therapy, recreational therapy opportunities, and this was sort of mentioned by my fellow co-panelists earlier, opportunities for socialization, opportunities to actually go outside, spend time in nature. I mean, this is really what makes life worth living. And there's profound social isolation and loneliness that comes from being in a long-term care institution. And especially if you're an older adult, that's something which actually we know from actual healthcare research. We know that that causes direct harm. It increases your risk of infections, such as pneumonia, or increases your risk of falls. It speeds up your cognitive decline. And so there's no doubt that, of course, this is direct harm, ableist harm that is propagated by the system of institutionalization, where we can end it. And I wanted to share just very briefly, and I think Megan is really one of the experts about speaking about deinstitutionalization, but from the data that I've read from various sources, even very conservative estimates tell us that perhaps 1 in 9 people living in long-term care institutions today can be sort of just actually taken out, and be moved back to their homes, back in their communities. And that's with our bare bones, sort of completely under-resourced and understaffed home care system. And that is and that's a very conservative estimate, but there's other estimates that say that those numbers are as high as 1 in 4. It could be even as 1 in 2. So we can just imagine that if we had the resources, and as mentioned, these resources absolutely belong to people who are disabled, and this is a human rights issue. That's really the way we should be thinking about this. We could be providing, and we should be providing, proper care and dignity outside of institutions, and we should be moving to deinstitutionalize people as well.
Thank you for that, Amit. Just before Jaclyn will let you get to what it is that you're going to say, but just in the interest of time too, I'm going to toss our third question out into the air as well. And so in addition to kind of thinking about how institutions engage in death making, there's also this question, obviously in the context of the MAiD debates in Senate right now, or the MAiD committee in Senate right now. The question of how does the threat of institutionalization through incarceration or confinement make MAiD more appealing as well. So if that's something that our panelists can also think on, and Jackie, if you're good to incorporate kind of a thought on that into your answer too, that would be great.
Yeah, y'all have set this up just so perfectly where I feel like
should I interrupt? Rain, do you mind saying that again a little bit louder? I just missed what the question was.
Yeah, so it's essentially, I'm just asking everyone to also consider just how the threat of institutionalization through incarceration or confinement make MAiD more appealing, in addition to how institutions, as part of the thought on how institutions engage in death making. Cool.
Thank you. I was just going to add, following what Megan and Amit have said, would be that, death making occurs in the ways that that have been described, both physically, but as my co-panelists have really emphasized, but in a way that's also maybe spiritual. And I don't mean that in the way of a particular affiliation to one religion or anything like that, but just in the core of our being, and about what makes life worth living, like we say, and also really in the way of cultural death and cultural genocide and things like that too. And I think it's really important that we think about how, even before the physical act of or occurrence of death, the ways that cultural death and spiritual death are produced. And my experience in researching in long-term care homes and talking to people there, and my experiences working with folks in prisons and things like that, something that I could emphasize, and there are so many examples of this, and this is just one, but is food. If you live your entire life eating food from your community, and it's a way you participate in your culture, it's a way even the preparation of your food, that can be that's the practice of culture, and sharing a meal, things like that. And to lose that is to lose a part of yourself, and I don't think there is any situation where anyone is deserving of losing something so close to them, and losing pleasure matters too, joy matters too. And we talk about these things and for very good reason. We are kind of focused, we are so honed in on like meeting immediate needs to prevent things like further injury or things like that, right? We're trying to address the really the worst of the worst things that are happening in these institutions. And I almost wonder if it's by design so that we also don't spend time looking at the killing of joy and the killing of culture and the killing of community and kinship and interconnectedness or like any of those things. You think about, and I'll try to be quick because I'm sensitive to time, but I think about some long-term care homes where people who are married or who've been in a relationship for their entire lives are housed on different floors, or they're not allowed to share a room, or things like that. And it's just like, you know, I really think in so many of these conversations, we almost need to move away from the idea that everything has to be so empirical or scientific, because life isn't just data, it isn't just statistics, it isn't just outcomes. Like if we're looking at anyone's life, like obviously that's important, that's how we justify the things that we do, the funding we apply for, the policies we write. But at its core, we also need to think about these, like I think has been said, what makes life worth living, and why isn't that important to us? Why is that seen as a luxury as opposed to like fundamental human right? And so it's just something that I think is really relevant to this conversation as we move, and I know other people are going to discuss the medical assistance and dying and things like that. But it's very hard to ignore the relationship between those things when you realize, well, I have this miserable life that, you know, has been made miserable for me because of these institutions, and I don't see any signs of it getting better. Some of those alternatives I could see being, you know, kind of spiritually very appealing to people. And that's, you know, I don't mean to speak for all people or to suggest that that is applicable in every situation, but it's certainly something that I feel really compelled to consider, and I hope everyone else does as well. So thank you very much.
No, thank you for that perspective. So either Jess or Aisha, if either of you want to go. Jess? Yeah, go for it.
I really appreciate that a lot, Jackie, because it reminded me of some things I could share more anecdotally if people are down with storytelling. But the job that I referenced having was pretty much the first and only job I was able to get at 15, living or having grown up in rural Ontario and looking the way I do with genetic disability. And it was at a summer respite facility, but also just a camp for children and adults with disabilities. And despite it being like a necessary space for a lot of folks, I don't know if they received direct funding from Community Living Toronto, the organization, but Community Living Toronto did have a lot of clients that came there. And it was one of the few camps that catered to not just disabled kids, and so adults. And often a lot of these adults would save up their like meager incomes the whole year just to spend a week or two at this facility. And what you shared about relationships not being honored really hit home, because it was a pretty triggering experience to have at 15, 16. It was a job I had for 6 years because it was the only job I could get. But I was still I think I only ever met one other camp counselor who was also disabled. Everyone else was able-bodied, and the training that we received in that facility, despite it being treated like a vacation or a respite, was very infantilizing in terms of when the topic of, you know, sex and sexual relationships, romantic relationships would come up. There was a lot of laughter and a lot of policing and a lot of, I don't know, it was pretty jarring. And the fact that I was probably one of the longest people who was also disabled working with disabled folks in providing palliative care and assistive care in a kind of DSW or PSW kind of role I think it's taken me like maybe like a decade or so to probably fully digest what I experienced in that kind of position. But absolutely, there was an encouragement to sort of police the way community, not even community, but just coming together within the spaces looks like. And it was always limited by, I don't know, like at best, like I just dismissiveness and a like comedy about it, and at worst a kind of violence, and that's inappropriate, that kind of thing, like an interruption of well, I wrote down some of your words like joy, pleasure, the reasons we are alive, and it sometimes bugs to this day that the name of an organization that tries to insert itself into this idea of like it would be so much better for people's livelihoods to be in home and to be a community is an organization called Community Living, and they also tend to be involved in perpetrative scenarios, and so I witnessed a lot of this firsthand and was in fact placed in a role where the option was to kind of follow a command of a duty and to like under the grounds of healthcare and safety to like interrupt people's relationships or to like I don't know like be robbed of an intimacy and a kinship with other disabled people and to witness that firsthand for folks in the room that have roles like this is a whole thing, and it's not something I honestly just want to say thank you. Like it's not a conversation I get to be in often because I actually even within family and close friends, people just don't know that these places exist, and they don't know how to have these conversations. And I think when you start to share about it, people sort of react as though it's made up because it's so illegible. And so I'll leave that there, but I just wanted to say thank you for what you shared, Jackie.
Yeah, I should take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Just it's hard to go right after, but after y'all, thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, yeah. Sorry you had to go through those things. Like yeah. And sorry for everyone that has to go through anything horrible. Who's with us, who is present, who is watching. But I just wanted to highlight that like the gravity of like the situation from like from like the prison perspective, for example, of like the use of MAiD in order to as like quote unquote like alternative for folks or however they present it to folks. But it's really just forcing people to kill themselves because what happens is that death by incarceration is like a practice that is common, despite that the death penalty has been abolished, people are still dying in jail. Actually, like after the abolition of the death penalty, the like the median time, I guess, like the average time that people spend behind bar increased drastically, right? So, which means that there's actually like a lot more people that die in jail than a lot more than when the death penalty was there in terms of like died by incarceration because they stay there for too long, back in the days, people used to do shorter sentences too for a lot of things. But now a lot of people spend 40 years in jail, they have no options. They got refused parole like several times. Their case management team, quote unquote, is just there to like sometimes like sabotage them. Like the parole officer will sabotage someone's release, based on disability and race, again, like and like class and stuff, like, you know what I mean? Like some folks, they don't even like look at them, even like they don't even want to look at them as disabled, like some black folks and other racialized folks. Just like, no, you're good. Like we're too racist for this. Like they're just too racist, like the henchmen of the state are too racist. Even the individuals sometimes, like a lot of times, but as a system, it is systematically racist. But I saw like some parole officers doing some like very like shady shit, like telling people, like for example, in the example that we got, that you know, that like there's like telling people that they're never gonna get out, you know, grabbing them by their hats, you know, like shaking them in the yard, like telling them that they will not get out, that they are losers, and like that they're like literally like basically trying to make them believe, pardon like my language, but it's gotta be raw with certain things because that's what happened. Like they just say like you're like the scum of the earth and stuff like that, you know, like telling that to people, you know, and condemning them otherwise. Even it is not during personal interactions, we have to also understand it as like this is like a systematic and systemic war that is waged on people. So like people systematically like are dying in prison, you know, spending a lot of time. So like when someone sees all their friends, you know, I'm not going to speak on their experience, but I've done time with a few lifers who done like 40 years in jail or whatever. And like these folks have like communities, like, you know, they grew up in jail, like so many years they spend in jail. So they see all their friends like dying and stuff like that, all the pain of like that pain and suffering that they go through, all the things that they see, the accumulation of suffering, you know. At some point, I don't know, like when people get refused parole and they present you with another option to exit that space, I'm not even in their shoes. And, you know, just to be frank, you know, how many times I thought about, you know, myself, you know, thankfully, like I'm still here, but like, you know, just thought about like, just, you know, like ending this, you know, and like, I can only imagine someone who spent 40 years in jail or 30 years in jail or 25 years, like that's only like my lips can talk about this, but that's like a whole different level of type of time that people done. So when they don't have outcomes, you know, when the jail is trying to kill them in a way or the other, like folks brought up, like killing them slowly or killing them slowly or killing them fast, you know, regardless, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I forgot what I was saying, but it's just a lot to see these things. Like, yeah, so basically the state is just, yeah, wants to kill them slowly or fast, you know? And like, that's what the state is concerned. Some people are disposable, you know? So some folks are disposable, and these are disposability politics. That's why when we say like we keep each other safe and we hold each other safe and we hold each other, we love on each other, we have to take those things, I guess, a little bit seriously, but because the state does everything but that, you know, and like folks are dying inside because they're being presented with the only option of MAiD, you know, to exit a jail, you know. So I'm not gonna speak for them, but it seems kind of sus.
Yeah, I think like both within many sites of institutionalization and incarceration, if you come out of it, you have a community who was in there. And I know for me, my experience of like trying to check in on those people has just like over and over and over again been finding out that they're dead. And this is like a direct result of institutionalization. And I think it's really exposes this when we look at psychiatric incarceration and we look at disability incarceration in general, is that like it's not, people are terrified of the threat of institutionalization, and they're terrified with the services that the state provides for when you're in psychiatric distress or when you're in distress because of your disability, whether that be going to the hospital, or whether it be like not wanting to have to go to a long-term care facility, even if it's the only place that is willing to provide you 24-hour care. And so I think like the exposition of how violent institutions are has really like makes clear that what we have right now is failing people and killing people, and psychiatric suicides after institutionalization remain like incredibly higher than pre-discharge rates. And so like we know that institutions don't save us. We know so many instances of medical violence. There was a piece that was supposed to be part of one of the next questions, but I'll just touch on it because we don't have time, there was a study done of MAiD providers in prisons, and every single one of the MAiD providers documented how it was a terrible experience, where someone was dying at the hands of their captors, where they weren't allowed their community or their families when they're even in their dying moments. And then of course, like before even leading up to that, prisoners have been offered MAiD when they've been given a diagnosis, knowing that they don't have anywhere else to go, or that the doctor on staff said, well, why aren't you considering this? Or like, wouldn't it just be easier because otherwise the rest of your life is going to be spent here? And then we see this also in terms of long-term care, where older people are dying because they don't want to be forced into long-term care and know that that's what their care needs are. So like our current conversations around medical assistance in dying and around institutionalization and like safeguards and all of those advanced directives, like for many people, their advanced directive would be if I'm institutionalized into long-term care, or if I'm institutionalized into psychiatric setting, then that's like the line of death. And I don't think like that we're prepared for that. And also like, I think that people don't grieve that as the same loss, because they're saying that, oh, people are being autonomous. They're not forced into a long-term care facility. But that's not an autonomous decision. That's a coerced decision. And we know that the expansion of MAiD, while we see how violent the conditions are, while abolitionists and long-term care advocates have exposed just how violent these conditions are, like, of course, people are going to turn towards MAiD because we know now, like, what it's like inside. And for lots of people, they don't have exposure to that before. And so, I mean, I just think that knowing the violences of institutionalization, death is like a really fair response. But that's a response to an inherently violent system designed to kill people anyway. So I think, yeah, it's just the threat of institutionalization and the threat of incarceration is so devastating, and it hangs over so many people, particularly people who are criminalized by the state.
I think that's a really kind of good way to encapsulate everything that's been said over the course of this panel. So thank you. So we have to move to our final question, and also keeping in mind that we also want to have just a brief moment of silence and remembrance for people who have died in prisons and in long-term care and all these carceral systems. But I'd like the panelists to just share with us, like, what will it take for institutions to close? You know, what do you dream of in a world without institutions? Megan, go for it. And
what will it take for institutions to close? I think an end to capitalism and a massive restructuring of our society. And I look forward to being able to access the like healthcare that I need without fear of the state, and like being able to just fucking chill. That's what I'd like.
thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. For me, and I don't suggest that this is the only thing that needs to happen, but I think it is a thing that needs to happen, which is we as societies need to find a way to, I'm looking for the words, but and I'm drawn to bell hooks. For those who don't know, I just read All About Love, and in that, bell hooks talks a lot about love as a practice as opposed to love as a feeling, and it's ongoing, and it's a commitment, and it's kind of like anything, right? If you aren't able to continue doing it, it's going to kind of potentially disintegrate or things like that. And I just think collectively as a society, we've really forgotten how to practice empathy and how to practice kinship and how to practice love. And I know for so many people that sounds a little woo-woo, but I also think, what is it then if we can't appeal to people on the basis of economic reasons? Like, we know the things that we're asking for cost less, so that's not good enough, and we know like all of that, there's so many things like that. And so I just think really creating a space where we can foster empathy, where we can foster love, where we can foster that practice, because we're all doing that by being here. And so what's so different about our communities and our spaces? Like, why is that missing from so many other places in society? And I actually don't know what the answer is to that. And maybe that's something I'm going to have to reflect on, but it's something I think about a lot, which is, why don't we feel like as a society, why don't we feel this collective responsibility for one another? Why do we think it's the responsibility of parents alone, mom and dad, and even the idea that parents exist as a mom and dad, but why is it just them? Why is it just their responsibility to take care of children? Why is it just the responsibility of children to take care of aging parents? Why don't we feel a responsibility for one another on a collective level? That is such a moral injury to our collective being, that we don't see each other as, our life force. Like, we can't exist without one another. And until we get to that place, and I know I sound like a little silly and a little over the top sometimes, but I really think it is the solution, or a solution, or a place where solutions can grow from. So that's all I have to say now. Thank you. Thank you all for the time and the space, because I don't know if I'll speak again. So thank you so much for giving me this platform.
Thank you for being here. Jess?
Did you say my name?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. I'm hard of hearing. Yeah, Jackie, that was really well put. It also reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from James Baldwin around love, where like the culmination of what he shares is love is a growing up. And like, I think, I don't know, I'm kind of just sitting with what everyone's shared today, so I'm not gonna speak too long, but I think often I don't know, it's for folks that have tuned in, I feel really grateful that there's other people in the conversation that, sadly we can't see in the real, but because a lot of people, I'm sure, are coming to this conversation with their own embodied experiences of institutions, and those are just as wise as anything anyone on the panel has shared. And it's really hard to want a kind of guidance, I think, around how to govern better and take responsibility better without maybe a roadmap on how to do that. And capitalism is a hell of a beast to push up against. And yeah, what does it mean to grow up? I don't think it means to numb oneself. I don't think it means to compartmentalize fully. I think there's an accountability that can be taken that maybe, is being figured out right now in reconciliation with a lot of like very detrimental policy that is, if we were to ask ourselves what institutions even are, it's just paperwork that is housed in physical structures. And I don't know, I'm really grateful to have been a part of this conversation today, and I appreciate how the closing of this panel is about a reverence for lives lost and an acknowledgement of that kind of coercion. And I appreciate folks that work directly with institutions and prisons sharing what they witness, because I think that's really important. Because oftentimes, when people are kind of forced into those contexts, it's really hard, and there aren't a lot of witnesses. And having family, that I've supported through incarceration, as well as having worked in a facility while learning at a very young age, that it's a context that people try to make for themselves while still being subjugated to a power dynamic. It is very tricky to hold that kind of responsibility in your heart and in your body, that you ladder to a person that isn't afforded the same ability to choose relatives and choose family and choose community. And so, I feel a lot of gratitude and reverence, and also, I guess, I hope folks that have been a part of this discussion, quietly in the listening space, and asking questions, thinking about those kind of things while researching what MAiD is, and the fact that it's, guised as a healthcare policy when it really doesn't adhere to a notion of what care is or should be. So but thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jess. I think it's just Amit and Aisha before we have our moment. So Amit, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I'm, to be honest, it's hard to follow Jackie, Megan, and Jez. I'll be very honest, I don't have anything in particular to add, after hearing them, just sort of soaking in the wisdom, and really sort of, have learned a lot actually through, this conversation, and feeling really humbled to be a part of this, discussion. And I'm at a loss for words. So thank you.
Yeah, I should go for it.
Is this me? Okay. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, folks, for everything that you said, and thank you for this last question that helped us, kind of tie everything back, or however you say it in English. But I feel like Jaclyn was sorry, I sound silly, and I don't know what Megan said, I just want to chill, and truly, sometimes these systems, they make us sound are we silly, are we what are we asking for, it's what is it, you know what I mean, what are folks asking for, basic recognition, and basic, our humanity, basic humanities to be recognized, but it is just taken away from us. So I guess a future, how I see the future is when everyone, or there is space for everyone to be seen as a human, as a whole person, and to just be treated in non-carceral ways, doesn't mean we don't have to be firm with each other and stuff like that, but doesn't mean that we have to send the goons with the goon squad with the guns and armed boots and stuff like that. We can hopefully be able to hold each other accountable. But the thing is though, the solution, I guess, for me is just and folks already said that anyways, it's just recognizing our responsibility and people being involved in their communities. Way too many people are involved in capitalism. Way too many people are trying to chase the Bitcoins or whatever, and all these things that a lot of folks don't even understand, and buy NFTs and please drop that. There's real life happening that is actually killing people. We're not trying to bring you back to basics or whatever. We're not these kind of people. Me, anyways. I'm not saying fuck technology altogether or whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying yo, be involved in your community. Organize read shit, like read stuff about it, you know, like read, you know, like if you can take it another ways, videos, like organizing your communities, you know, like in literally like your communities, like in like immediate communities, like whatever you are, and like hold solidarity with other people outside of those communities, and just like do that stuff, you know, and like see what other people that came before you maybe are saying on that, you know, like get some like knowledge from like other folks that were there before, but doesn't mean that your experience is less than them. It's just like you just like, you know, you have like whatever you starting, like as like a young organizer, I can say that. And like, yeah, like just try to organize, you know, folks who can like lend your time to like organizing to your community, you know, to like fighting these things, you know. If you know like disabled folks who are attacked in your community, like yo, be in solidarity with them, you know. If they need money, trying to like raise money for them. If they need to go to a meeting, whatever, do that, you know what I mean? Like make sure like someone is there in the neighborhood that can like drive folks around, or like I don't know, like if you have some migrants that like don't have healthcare, you know, like a lot of folks. I have to go get my healthcare, but yeah, like trying to like help them out, you know, if you know some doctors and stuff like that, like go check sanctuary policies, you know, that supports, you know, everyone. Like a lot of disabled folks can access like, and like sick and ill folks can access treatment because they don't have they don't have a status, you know, they don't have the proper papers, you know. If you see that in your workplace, if you work at a hospital, at a community center where there's those barriers for people, like yo, organize against them, you know, just do that. And like, yeah, and like don't forget, like, yeah, I guess like that's one of the thing I want to like add, like not even add, just say my thoughts on it. But yeah, but a different, I just want to say like a different word is possible, you know. The only possibility is what we think is possible in our mind. If we don't think something is possible, we're actually like hindering like progress. Like just like the least is think it's possible, you know what I mean? And like better futures that are like decolonial. Just think that police is like shouldn't exist. Like start by that. Like why do you have to like hold on to this idea that these like institutions that actually kill people have to exist? Like where did that come from? These institutions just started right now, you know? Like prisons, like they just started right now. They're just like a reform, you know? Like these things didn't exist forever. So like why are you like so attached to like how like these people that you don't even have a relationship with, like trying to devise the word for you, you know? Just yeah, like defend people in your neighborhood, like stand up for them, and like be like in your neighborhood and communities as much as you can, you know, pretty much. That's the futures I can see, like that I want, like I wish like we have, you know. Well, I wish I don't have to defend ourselves, but sorry.
I don't apologize. It's good to hear from you. Yeah. So if we want, can we like just first of all, thank you to everybody for speaking and for being here. It's like I said, always an honor to share this space with you folks. And just before we kind of move it to turning off the recording and like having a bit of like a moment to, I don't know, be together without the recording on, I guess. Let's have like a moment of silence and remembrance for people whose lives have been lost at the hands of the state, at the hands of these institutions. All right, folks. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. I hope that this was as powerful a resource for you as it was for me. Big thank you again to our panelists, Amit, Aisha, Megan, Jess, Jackie, and Q, who had to leave at the beginning. And yeah. Oh, Aisha, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say, like, very briefly before we exit, if it's possible to maybe just say like a few names of people who passed inside and stuff like that, like from top of our head, if we remember, maybe some folks can add some, so that way their memories stay with us today. If I know we can't see 16,000 names of people who died in long-term care homes and stuff like that, but if folks can like know some names, maybe like unmute yourselves and like maybe like say some names of folks who you know like have died inside or through carcerality or other systems. I can start, you know, I can start with Suleiman Fakiri, Justin Santamore, who died at OCDC, Cleve Geddes, who also died at OCDC. I can say Abdurrahman Abdi, who also died on Algonquin territory due to like carceral violence. I can say Anthony Aust, who died on this territory as well due to carceral violence. Greg Ritchie, who also got killed by the Ottawa police here as well for like when he was at the mall. Yeah, maybe some other folks want to say. If not, I can continue on saying, but maybe some.
I'll say Nathan Gladue.
Yeah, I say Gladys Tolley, who's also Algonquin, who died on this territory, was killed by the police. I say Regis Korchinski Paquette, Pierre Corleone.
Andrew Loku.
Go ahead, sir.
No, that's it. Yeah, Andrew Loku, Shivrana Abdi, the three folks that we mentioned even on this panel, Arun Kumar Rajendran, Durrell Tavernier, and Stephen Kelly. Megan just put in the chat, Chris Gladders and John Taggart.
Yeah. Also Jean Toussaint. My friend Leo.
Thank you for that suggestion, Aisha. And it's heavy, but thank you for being here, folks. And yeah, take good care. And we'll see you on the next one, hopefully. 8 and counting.
Which I think Catherine has an announcement about.
Oh, right.
Just really quickly, but first, let me echo my thanks to everyone. You have brought a profoundly important subject of recurring moral injury that happens to our kinfolk in places where there isn't enough attention paid. And I thank you for that, and I thank you for the love and care and respect with which you've all done that. Thank you to Wayne and Sarah, our hosts, and a special shout out to Megan, who worked behind the scenes to bring all of you into the Filibuster family, and to give this this session so much of its substance and importance. So thank you very much. Just want to let you all know that we'll be back with broadcast number 9. We are planning for next Monday, June 6th. That may change because it appears that it will be competing with a parliamentary committee broadcast. Normally, we don't care all that much about that committee, but I believe there are some of our kinfolk going to be on that broadcast, so we want to be sure to not be competing with them. But the next broadcast is going to look at the history of assisted dying. Many of us think of that history as going back, 2 years or 6 years or a decade. It goes back much further. And we're going to take a deep dive into the history. We have some experts on board with us. And so stay tuned. Be ready for June 6th. So be prepared perhaps for June 7 or 8. We will let you know as soon as we have that confirmed. Meanwhile, don't forget to keep your eye on our website, our Twitter feed. Stay in touch. And don't forget about our GoFundMe. We're living on a shoestring here, but we've still got lots to say. Thank you, everyone. And now we're going to ask members of the audience to leave the auditorium, so to speak. Leave the webinar if you wouldn't mind. We will keep it open for a minute just to chat in camera with the guests, but if we can give the audience a moment to sign out. And if any of you are having trouble, we have help at the tech end to escort you to the door. So we'll get